It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Stu Shostak. Hey, Stu, how are you?
Hello, Douglas. Long time no chat.
Yeah, it's been, a month you were on last time?
I think so. I'm back to being a non-entity. The film came and went. It's still up there for anybody that wants to see it, but I'm back to being a non-celebrity again, so I'm honored you wanted me back.
Well, we had such a great conversation last time, and we just ran out of time, basically. So I wanted to kind of continue on where we were, and because there's so much more to you than we can possibly fill in an hour.
I say that every time I look in the mirror. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know as we all get older, there is more to us, that's for sure.
Oh, yes, yes.
So last time we covered basically your start. You were a ticket hander-outer on the streets in Hollywood for the various TV shows that were going on in the day. And then you also ended up working for Lucille Ball for 10 years as her film archivist, which was probably an amazing job. A lot of memories, yes. I'm sure you have for that. And you have your own show, which you do, bi-weekly now?
Yes, because it's video, and then I'm the one-man operation. I research it, write it, produce it, direct it, and host it. Every other week is enough.
Well, I hear you. You know, I did listen to your Bob Barker interview, and I wanted to bring that up just quickly. The one thing that I was really impressed by was your production value, because as you know, the podcast sort of market, and this is one of my bitches that I have all the time, is that it's just way oversaturated. And there's just so much crap out there that people just don't know what they're doing. So when I hear a show like yours, where you really put a lot of time into the production, I mean, you had old clips, you had sound effects, you had the whole thing going. I thought, wow, okay, this is great. So, kudos to you for that. But also, the Bob Barker interview was interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the way you formatted the interview was really like one of those Ralph Edwards, This Is Your Life, which I thought was kind of ironic considering Bob Barker's relationship with Ralph Edwards, which was relevant and came up in the interview. Ralph Edwards was the producer for Truth or Consequences, right?
He owned the show.
He owned the show.
One who created the show and hosted it on radio and the first year on television.
Okay, so it was interesting that while I'm listening to the interview you did with Bob, I'm thinking, geez, this is just like one of those Ralph Edwards, This Is Your Life. Did you do that on purpose, or just that's the way it came out?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I never thought of that. I joke all the time when I book a celebrity, and especially a well-known one like Bob Barker. It's like, okay, we're going to cover your life as much as we can. With his interview, though, I did do that to a certain extent, but because he had been interviewed so many times over the past 30 years about Price is Right, I told him up front, look, I want to we'll talk about your early years and how you got to where you are, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on Price is Right. We'll talk about that the first maybe 20, 25 minutes of the show. What I want to do for the rest of the show, though, is focus on Truth or Consequences, because nobody has seen that show in a long time. Nobody knows how genuinely brilliant you were on that show, and that's all I needed to say to him, by the way. They're not in rerun like every other game show is, either on Game Show Network or on Buzzer, and that's the show that really puts you on the map, and that's the show that really showed everybody how great you could be getting people to be themselves and to be funny without making fun of them. And he liked everything he heard from that. I knew exactly how to get to him because that was the first show I worked on professionally when I got into the business. And so I knew his MO, and I knew if I had hit that spot, we would be able to do the type of interview I wanted to do, because nobody in 50 years has asked him about Truth or Consequences. And it just came out that way, Douglas. To make a long story longer, we covered his career, his life and meeting his wife and all of that, but we basically stopped at Truth or Consequences because I felt it was an untapped area of his career that really needed to be stated as much as he's well known for as Price is Right. Had that show been 4 hours, yeah, we would have covered Price is Right, but we wouldn't have gotten into any of the conflicts, let's say, between the models and his relationship with Mark Goodson and any of that, because I knew from previous interviews he would not talk about any of that stuff unless he knew me a lot better than he did and trusted me more. So I kind of knew where my bread was buttered on him. Generally, though, yeah, I kind of do the show like This Is Your Life. We start in the early years and ask the guests, how they got involved in the business, what they did as children to stimulate that interest, if any, and we take them right up to the present day. So I guess in a way it is like This Is Your Life. Now, that's a very long answer to your short question.
Well, what I found interesting was that, instead of like bringing the third grade teacher in, which they used to do on that show,
she'd be dead now for him.
But you just said, okay, you use the clips, you use the audio clips in place of that. And that was the only difference.
Right. And now I'm doing it video-wise, and that's why it's a lot more work, because I'm using a video editor now instead of an audio editor. And from my own archives, I have, when I book a guest, I always check my archives to see what I have. And again, like you mentioned, I don't want to do a shoddy show on the internet. I don't want to be some quote unquote influencer that, splashes perfume on my face and all of a sudden, 1,400 14-year-olds are buying that product. I take a lot of pride in my work. I do a lot of effort. I do a lot of research. I want it entertaining not only for the guest and for me, but for anybody who's watching. And that requires a lot of prep. And that's why I'm only doing the show every other week now.
Well, I appreciate that, because there is just so much fluff and garbage out there. And I did interview one author last week who was the first person to say that they believe that the podcast craze is waning. And I hope so, because for a while, for about the last 10 years, it's just been going up exponentially. There's over 3 million registered podcasts on listennotes.com.
And most of them are garbage.
And most of them are garbage.
People like you and me who are trying to do quality programs a bad rep because we get lumped in with that. Oh, he does a podcast.
Right, exactly.
He's on the internet. What is this? Does he get 20 hits on YouTube? Is that what you're doing? Oh, I get so much of that. And the point is, and I make this joke on my show all the time, sadly, any idiot with a microphone and a webcam can have a show online now.
Yeah.
Not that anybody's going to watch it in any great numbers or listen to it, but it really dilutes the whole industry, and I hope you're right. And when the smoke clears of people like you and me and a handful of other people, Mark Maron for one, Gilbert Gottfried until he passed away, there are some really, really, Kevin Pollak had one for a while that was very good. I don't know if he's still doing it, but it really, it just distorts people like us who take a lot of pride and effort into our work, and it wrecks it for us. And that's one of the reasons that my audience, even after the film and all the publicity we did on the documentary, didn't change that much, because it's so vast out there that even though the film did well, we still only hit a speck of people overall. So it's really hard. And don't let anybody tell you there's a lot of money to be made in this either.
Well, that was the other point I was just going to bring up. Because there are so many out there, it really dilutes the pool for sponsors. Good luck getting a sponsor of any quality.
all of the sponsors that I have, and I've got 6 or 7 of them, most of them have been with me for the 16 years I've been on the air, believe it or not. I've had some come and go, but because of the dilution factor, they hit my audience, they make their sales, it sort of peaks, plateaus, and levels off, and then it's like, well, you do a great show, but I haven't sold anything in a while, and that's because of all these other fly-by-nights that we're competing against.
Yeah, it's exactly true. Well, I hope that this author said that. It was the first time I'd heard that. So I'm really hoping that's true. And she was saying that, what's going to happen is that the hacks that are doing podcasts are going to give it up because they're going to realize it does take a lot of work. And they're starting to migrate over to TikTok and doing, little 1 minute.
Short 2 minutes. Good.
Yeah.
I have nothing to do with TikTok. I hate that place. And
Yeah,
I
me too.
hate Twitter, too.
Yeah.
Facebook I basically use just to help promote the show. I have a personal page and I have a page for the show. But again, it's very limited. Once you hit a saturation point, you do a lot more than I do. My show is classic TV, and that's it. Once in a while I'll veer away, but not often. But you have a diverse amount of subjects and topics you cover. You're going to have a much better chance, if not already, of broadening your base. But I don't know anything other than classic TV. I could do a political thing because I'm very protective of my political views. But there's 3 million other political shows out there. As long as I keep it to classic TV, I've got at least there are a couple of other people that are doing classic TV shows. I don't call my show a podcast. I call it a TV show on the internet. I hate the word podcast, but there are only a couple of other people that are doing what I'm doing, but they don't get the caliber of guests that I get because of my 16 years of reputation. I don't see Bob Barker or Dick Van Dyke, I don't know, pick another person. There's somebody else that I've had, Jonathan Winters. I mean, a lot of the people have passed, but you don't see the big names like that on a lot of these other podcasts. You might have experts who know their careers on those other podcasts, or authors who have written books on those people on other podcasts. But I'm lucky enough that I built up the reputation that I had those people, living or no longer with us, that thought enough of me and my reputation to come and do my show. And that to me means more to me than however many people are tuning in every week.
Oh, well, I agree with you. And you also worked for a lot of those people. You knew them. You were, connected one way or another. You worked on the show that their friend worked on, or you know what I mean? You were in the business.
That's how I got the show started. Had I not had that base to pull from in 2006, I mean, the people that I worked on when I was either doing audience warm-up or booking audience who were my first guests, Pat Harrington and Bonnie Franklin for One Day at a Time, for example.
Right.
I gave out tickets to fill that show. In those Dwayne Hickman, who I'd met, Stan Livingston, my 3 sons. These were personal friends of mine at the time that came and knew that I would do a good job and knew that I would cover their careers properly. And then, word spreads from that. And now I've done over 600. I've done over almost 120 television shows at the time we're recording this, and I've done 500 audio broadcasts.
Was Stan Livingston? Was he Ernie or Chip?
He was Chip. Barry, his brother, was Ernie.
Ernie was the one with the dark hair and the glasses, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So I saw Dick Van Dyke's name on you. Did you also work for him in some capacity?
I did not meet Dick Van Dyke. I met him a couple of times while I was working for Lucy, but it was one of those, hey, how nice to meet you type of things. He and Lucy are my favorites, always have been since I was a kid. And if you told me I was a kid that I would grow up to know them and work for them. Dick Van Dyke started out as a friend, and now I'm doing archiving for him the way I did for Lucy. But it's a lot different. I mean, he's got boxes and boxes of stuff that are totally unorganized, and his wife Arlene and I are going through everything, and we're cherry picking stuff that's either decomposing or starting to, or something of value that we think needs to be preserved for the public, as opposed to doing his home movies. We'll eventually get through everything, but that started because he said to me, didn't you do archiving for Lucille Ball? We were just sitting around talking one day, and I said, yeah. And he said, I've got boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that I have no idea what's out there. And it just started from that. So it's not a steady thing. I more have a friend with he and his wife than I am an employee. But every once in a while she'll say, hey, Dick just went through another box of stuff and he wants you to digitize this because we're not sure what's on here. And then I'll drive over there and pick it up and bring it back here. And sometimes she'll go with me if she's curious enough and come back here. Or, I'll just transfer it and bring it back over and we'll look at it together. And we're organizing it as we're doing it. So it wasn't a steady thing like I had for Lucy back in the 80s. It's just sort of I'm helping them out type of thing.
Well, now, is this all his like home movies, or is this the old shows?
It's everything. It's everything. I'm finding original broadcasts of his 60s shows in there, because he and Mary Tyler Moore did a lot of the last commercials on there, which, are not in general circulation. There's Super 8 sound. He was a spokesperson for Kodak in the late 60s and early 70s when Super 8 sound came out. So they, augmented him and fitted him with all of this equipment for, in addition to paying him big bucks for doing the spots. So he took a lot of Super 8 sound films, which I've transferred some of them. It's everything. But the problem is, Douglas, they're all mixed in together. There's no organization to them. He just, here, take this box. And it's got everything in it. So the first thing I do is sort it. And that takes a while, and then I transfer it, and then I keep it sorted by putting the home movies in separate boxes and stuff. I mean, this is what Lucy used to pay me for, except her stuff was all organized. Her stuff was stored in a professional film vault in Hollywood, and it was all on shelves and given, shelf numbers and position numbers. And for the most part, all of her stuff was in order. But because they had organized it when it came into the vault there, but there was some stuff there that had to be reorganized. This is just a mishmash of everything. It's like as it came in, he just started filling boxes with it, and it's a bit more of a challenge, but it's still interesting to go through all this stuff and see. He took home movies just like you or I would. He's just a regular guy. So.
I saw something on the news about him that he kind of came out in public or was walking around or something, and he looked pretty good. But he's well into his 90s, isn't he?
He's 96, and he walks without a cane, and he still drives. And Arlene set up a mini gym for him in the backyard, but for the really heavy-duty stuff, he goes to a local gym there in Malibu, I think 3 or 4 days a week at 7 in the morning, and you should watch him work out. It's like somebody in their 50s working out. And, it's all due to his wife, too. I mean, she takes really good care of him, looks out for him. He's got a great marriage, and he's going to make it to 100. I have no doubt in my mind. I talk to him all the time on the phone. He's 100%. He doesn't think he is, but he is. He's just amazing, just an amazing person, and as nice as you would expect him to be. He is Rob Petrie.
Oh, that is amazing. Now, somebody else that I think you knew was Betty White.
I didn't know her well. I knew her a little bit, but from what I knew, again, she's hysterically funny, on all the time, sweet, nice, can tell a dirty joke like anybody else. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady. I hadn't seen her talk to her in about 6 or 7 years. They were kind of keeping her health guarded after Hot in Cleveland went out because she, at that point, was starting to have trouble walking. And from what I understand, though, she had her marbles right up until the end. It just physically, she wasn't in great shape those last couple of years.
Well, I was so sad that she was 2 weeks shy of 100 because that would have been a
You know who else was? I don't know if you know who June Foray was. June was the voice of Rocky the Flying Squirrel in the Bullwinkle cartoons.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
And she and Janine and I were very, very good friends the last 10 or 15 years of her life. And same thing with her. She took a bad fall, and she never totally recovered from it. She was 98 when she had the fall, and at that point, up until that point, she was still walking, just like Dick was without a cane, but that sort of confined her to a wheelchair, and she started losing her mental ability just a little bit. But 6 weeks shy of her 100th birthday, we lost her too.
Yeah, that's too bad. Well, hopefully Dick makes it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, he's got a wife that adores him and takes good care of him, and he adores her, and it really is a really, really good marriage, and there's no doubt in my mind that he'll make it to 100 because of her. Yeah.
This is a little off the wall, but I'm going to throw it in anyways and just see what your reaction is. Do you have a favorite I Love Lucy episode?
It's really hard. If I had to, I look at that show differently now than when I was a kid. If you had asked me when I was a kid, when I first discovered her, I would go along with everybody else and say either the Chocolate Assembly Line show or Vitamita Vegemin or the Grape Stomping. Those are the three that always make everybody's list. And although those are great shows, I look at the writing and the execution and just the talent. Now, the Vitamita Vegemin show is certainly among that. She took a script that was written a certain way and did it. I mean, that's all her. She took it and interpreted what the writers wrote, and they could not write how drunk she got from drinking that. So that is one of my favorites simply because she is so brilliant in it. It's not one of my favorites because it's funny and it's classic. It's because of the way it was executed, the way it was written, and the way she pulled it off. I tend to go with the ones that are written and performed better than those. For example, one of the most brilliant pieces of writing is during one of the pregnancy episodes where she's worried that Ricky's accent is going to influence the baby's English speaking.
I remember that one. Yeah.
I don't know if you know the episode, there's a scene in the bedroom where Ricky's reading a story, and the writers brilliantly came up with this story for him to read where there are 6 or 7 different words that all end in O-U-G-H.
I do remember that.
And they're pronounced differently.
Right.
Okay? That is brilliant. To write something like that for a guy whose English is not his first language and expect him to know the different ways of pronunciation, that is brilliant writing. So that has been one of my favorites. And that whole episode is a very good episode, but that particular scene is absolute excellence. And the other one that's similar to it is when they're in Europe and she's arrested for counterfeiting. And the payoff to that show is that nobody in the jail speaks the same language. So they have this assembly line of people who speak French and German and Spanish and English, and they're going up and down and back and forth up and down this line. That, again, brilliant writing, and the way it paid off, too, the way it was performed, brilliant. So I tend to go with those more than the ones that everybody else loves because as an adult, I'm looking at it from a quality and content point of view. And so those are 2 of my favorites.
Can I tell you mine?
Sure.
Okay, it's not any of the ones we've talked about, which I find interesting. The one that gets me that I would have to classify as my favorite was called Lucy's Mother-in-Law.
Oh, well, there you go. You've got the language barrier in that one, too.
Yeah, with when she had that little earpiece in, and all of a sudden she speaks fluent Spanish. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one kills me every time.
Again, brilliant. And then when the professor has to leave the kitchen because his grandson is born, and he goes, "It's a boy," and she yells out, "A boy!" And that's great. That's a great episode. You see, everybody is going to have a different favorite, but the 3 that I mentioned at the top of this discussion are the 3 that everybody usually refers to.
Those are sort of the classic favorites. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Chocolate Factory and Vitamita.
And the Grape Stomping.
Yeah.
And Lucy embellished all of those episodes over the years that she was on talk shows. They got more and more unbelievable behind the scenes. She told a story at the Grape Stomping show that the woman that they hired that she had to fight with didn't speak any English. And that's why, and she tells about being held down underwater too long. And that's not true at all. There would be nobody working on that show if they didn't speak English. They'd have to be able to take direction. And that woman was not a grape stomper from the Valley. That's come out there too. She was an actress. She was an actress in Italy, she was not a grape stomper ever, as far as I know, unless she did that in Italy as a teenager. But they said that Lucy said in one interview that there was still a grape stomping thing out in the San Fernando Valley as late as the mid 1950s. That wasn't true either. But she got carried away with a lot of these stories, and she got big laughs. And when you get big laughs, you remember what you said, and so you embellish it, and you're trying to be entertaining, not necessarily truthful. The nose catching on fire in the William Holden episode.
Yeah.
Okay? That she kept saying for years that was not supposed to happen. It was in the script. What she didn't know was that it was going to flame up so much. That's what she didn't know, but it's in the script that the end of it catches on fire with the cigarette. Because that was the whole purpose of the payoff of the scene. If you watch it, he tries to light her cigarette and the nose catches on fire, and that's what it said in the script. But what didn't happen was what she didn't expect was that it was going to flame up so much. It really scared the hell out of her, and that's why what wasn't in the script, she had to get that thing out because she was afraid it was going to burn right to her nose through the putty. Is when she grabbed the tea and dunked it into the tea or the coffee or whatever. That was not in the script.
Well, that was brilliant. Yeah.
And because she was scared to death. She never mentions that. She just says the nose was not supposed to catch on fire, which is wrong. It was, but it made for a better story when she retold it.
Was there anything like that, any embellishment with the Harpo Marx one?
All I know that I remember, I had Dora Singleton on the show, who is Carolyn Appleby. And it's funny that in all the interviews she did, at least the ones that I had seen up to that point, nobody ever asked her about Harpo Marx. And I did. And she said the only thing she remembered from that, other than the fact that Harpo was one of the sweetest, nicest people and had this big, deep New York Bronx voice, like, your old uncle with a big cigar. That's what he sounded like, one of these how you doing kind of guys. That's how he sounded. And if you'd never put that voice to that face.
No.
But he sounded like Groucho with a deeper voice. The one thing that she said was Lucy meticulously rehearsed that mirror scene at the end, to the point where Harpo was exhausted from it. But she was so determined to make it perfect by the time Thursday night rolled around to film that show. She was just, she said anytime Doris said she turned around, Lucy was rehearsing that scene. And if Harpo wasn't available or didn't want to do it, she did the mannerisms and everything by herself, looking into a mirror. She spent more time on that than the rest of that episode at all.
Because it seems like it was very ad lib. I mean, I think that was the idea. But Harpo was such a master that he could almost just pull that off without any rehearsal.
Well, and that was the thing. And knowing Lucy as I did in working on her last series, she was meticulous about rehearsal. Over and over and over again until it was second nature. She never did it till it was stale. But something as critical as that, which, they obviously borrowed from Duck Soup, she won it perfectly. But Harpo didn't need to rehearse it, but he accommodated her as much as he could so that, when they got out in front of the audience, it was brilliant. And again, a totally unbelievable situation when you think about it. Here they are, two of them live in the flesh, and he's supposed to pretend like he's looking at himself in the mirror in that kitchen. Where's the mirror, Again, they were able to break reality a lot and get away with it. You couldn't do that today. That was one of the problems with our series, with Life with Lucy. They were trying to do stuff they could get away with in the 50s, in the 80s, and it just didn't work. The audiences became more sophisticated due to shows like Golden Girls and Taxi and Cheers. But the writers were fooled. They thought that the public would buy Lucy in any situation. Let's go back to another I Love Lucy episode that was totally unbelievable. The bread coming out of the oven.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You saw how big that, Bob Schiller always said that was the most phallic episode of I Love Lucy he's ever seen. And, but the point is, you saw where the wall to the kitchen is. You saw how deep the oven is. You saw the bread, the way it came out. The crew was on the other side of that facade wall, pushing that bread through the back of the oven. They had taken the back of the oven off to push it through. A hilarious sight gag, absolutely hilarious program, but totally, there's no way that could have happened.
That was real bread?
Space in the kitchen to put a loaf of bread that long in, But they got away with it. That's my point.
Well, they got away with it, and because of the way the camera was cut. Obviously, if you saw the other side of the wall, it would totally blow the illusion. What
you're saying is they broke reality. If that was a real kitchen with a real oven, there's no way that they could have put a piece of bread that long inside and have it come out. Right. You're being logical, Douglas. That's the way they did it. But I'm saying they broke reality because that could never have happened in real life. That's what I'm saying.
In other words, the way that they did it, people were willing to accept it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was that way throughout. How about when she went through the starch vat and came out at the end? Yeah. With her hair up and her cheeks all pushed in and all that. Anybody going through a starch vat would have died from poison, from inhaling, starch and stuff like that. Instead, they got a sight gag out of it that was absolutely hilarious. But they couldn't do that in the show that we did in the 80s.
Right.
Because, first of all, she was 75 and not 40. And like I said, you had shows like Golden Girls and Cheers and things like that. I mean, you had your crappy shows too. Your silly stuff like Alf was on during that time too. But people expected a lot more of Lucy. But the writers were fooled because I Love Lucy in some cities during the 80s was on 4 times a day, and people were still watching it and loving it, and they thought that that's what the public wanted, and they did, but they didn't want it the way that it was, the way we presented it. It was still a lot of fun being on that show, though, watching her and Gail Gordon rehearse. I'll tell you, I got a lesson I'll never forget there.
Now, what did you do on that show exactly?
I started out as Gary Morton's assistant on that show, and basically I was on the set with him and taking notes for him and answering his phone in the office when we weren't on the set and stuff like that. And what had happened was my video business had started to get busier. This was the mid-'80s when VHS was taken off, and I had started that as a sideline, which was taking up more of my time. I was working really hard on the weekends, catching up with my video work, and then I'd have to be back there on Monday mornings and then work a full week there. And it just got to be a big strain, and so we kind of mutually agreed about halfway through the season that I would still be in charge of the audience because that was my background. That's how I got in the business, and nobody there really knew how to handle that end of it. But I was able to do that from my office in Chatsworth at the time, where I had my video business, and I'd come in basically just the day before the show and then the night of the show to make sure that the pages got the audience in on time and the guests of the show were seated in the proper places, and that we, just to ensure that we had a full audience. And but that again, I think I worked the first 7 shows full time, and I was just exhausted and I was still doing warm-ups then too. I was working on Mama's Family at that time, so I was averaging 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, and something was giving, even though I was in my 30s. It was just too much, because I didn't know what the future of that show was going to be. My video business was everything to me, and that I just had to make a decision. And I'm still running the video business, so I made the right decision.
Well, that show didn't last very long.
8 weeks on the air.
Yeah.
We did 13 weeks total, and 8 of them aired. The other 5 did air in Canada. The show was a moderate success in Canada. But again, I don't know how good your Canadian television history is. In Canada, there wasn't much competition. I think the King of Kensington was our biggest competition there. So look that up. Google that.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
All right. We started talking a little bit about Bewitched after the interview, after the first one. And I want to circle back to that because it is sort of relevant to I Love Lucy in the connection with Bill Asher, right?
A lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And we had talked about that it was one of the few shows where they had multiple people playing the same character. They had one actor playing 2 different characters. But there was a lot of bizarre things about the show. There were rumors that it was haunted because of the witch theme, because people died under very mysterious circumstances or died tragically or died very young. And to my knowledge, the only people still alive from that show are Aaron Murphy, who played Tabitha, and Lawrence something, who played Adam.
The Lawrence twins and the Murphy twins.
And the Murphy twins, right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There aren't any other principal actors left. They're all gone.
They're all gone, right.
Yeah, I think Casey Rogers was, who is Louise Tate, was the last of them. Sandra Gould was around for a couple of our Lucy conventions, but she died right after that. She had gained a ton of weight and was just in a very unhealthy condition. Who was the first to go? I guess Agnes Moorehead was the first to go.
No, the first Gladys Kravitz was the first to go.
Well, okay. Oh, well, Alice Pierce.
Alice Pierce.
But I mean, as far as the stars, I think Agnes was first, and then Dick York died before Elizabeth a few years, didn't he? Dick York died around 91 or 92, and Elizabeth was gone in 96 or 97, I think.
Okay. Well, Paul Lynde he died in the 70s.
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, but again, you know what's interesting is everybody thinks Paul did a whole bunch of shows, many episodes. He was only in 8 or 9 of that whole run of Bewitched. And the first time he was on the show, he played a driving instructor. He wasn't Uncle Arthur.
I remember that. And in fact,
same thing with Bernard Fox.
Bernard Fox
in the second season of the show played a witch hunter.
Right. It's interesting how they transitioned people.
Well, what happens is they come in there, and William Asher takes an instant liking to them, and either says, let's create a character, and maybe they have somebody in mind. In Paul Lynde's case, I think that's exactly what happened. They created Uncle Arthur after he did that first episode and created that for him. I'm not sure Bernard Fox was their first choice for Dr. Bombay, but I'm sure he was in the top 5.
What was interesting, too, was that there were some bit players like Charles Lane and a couple of other people that would always come back as the client.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, again, it's just like I've had a lot of those people on my show, people like H.M. Wynant and, it's funny, now I'm on the spot to try to come up with a character actor. Well, William Shallard was on my show. People like that, they're reliable, they're on time, they know their lines, and usually the way it worked back in the 60s, because there were no VCRs for people to say, hey, that's the guy that was on the show last week, and here it is. They, all the casting companies, the Desilu and Screen Gems, they have their list of people that they call, and the rule of thumb was usually 1 episode a year. Charles Lane would come back and play a different stingy client,
right?
Or Charles Lane on I Love Lucy one year would be a stingy business manager, and the next year he'd be a stingy passport guy.
Yeah.
These are reliable people that everybody knows who they are, but the public accepts them playing different roles, even though they're similar. I've always felt that Norman Fell and Audra Lindley on Three's Company were just an undersexed version of Gladys and Abner Kravitz. Think about it.
Yeah, I could see that.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Okay? They're Gladys and Abner without the sex. Okay? or with the sex or whatever. But, everything is a steal from something else. And in the case of Alice Pierce, she was wonderful, and she had cancer that whole last season. She was doing the show and kept it quiet until she couldn't anymore. And why they replaced her with Sandra Gould, who I felt was way over the top. She, again, playing the role differently, just like Dick Sargent had to play Darren differently, but where Alice Pierce was, even though she was kind of mousy and not great looking, she was great. She was great in that role. When they replaced her with Sandra Gould, I thought that character got very irritating. And
I agree.
Fred Wayne was on my show. Fred Wayne played Benjamin Franklin in that classic 2-part episode.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And that's when Sandra first started on the show. And in fact, you may not know this, the very first episodes they filmed for that 3rd season were the Ben Franklin shows. They actually shot those first, before they did Tabitha becoming a witch and all of that stuff. So those were the first shows that they did. They just aired them later on in the season. Ironic, those are the first shows they shot in color. But Fred on my show said Sandra Gould was so annoying during the filming of those. She was just over the top and overacting, and the director had to keep telling her to tone it down. And again, though, that was her first time on the show. But just for me, my taste, she played that role. She took what Alice Pierce did and just made it irritating. Alice Pierce was funny. Sandra Gould was annoying. If it wasn't for George Tobias, it wouldn't have worked.
As Abner, he was brilliant. Yeah, he was the perfect straight man.
And I never met him, but from the people I knew that did meet him said he was the nicest, sweetest guy, and he could never understand why the fans of the show loved him so much. He said it was just a role that he did, but he was so great in it, you know? He was great with her. When they used him outside, like when he's talking to the Stevenses or apologizing for Gladys's behavior, I didn't think he was that great. He was only good when he was putting Gladys in her place. I thought he was wonderful.
Well, his sarcasm was fantastic. It was brilliant.
Yeah, but it didn't work as well with Sandra because she was so over the top and so loud and so obnoxious. It worked so much better with Alice Pierce because you kind of felt sorry for Alice. Saying all this stuff and nobody believing her, Sandra made it so obnoxious. It's like, somebody should just lock you up and he should remarry. That's what I felt anyway.
I just thought of this, and I hope this isn't going to be taken as insulting in any way because I don't mean it to be. But we were talking about some of the people like Charles Lane who kind of came in off and on as different characters. Mm-hmm. There was another one named John Feldler. Oh,
yes.
Your voice sounds like him.
You're not the first to tell me that.
Oh, good. Okay. I didn't want to call that an insult.
We used John Feldler on a sitcom as a semi-regular on a sitcom that I did on Disney Channel. And at one point, one of the executive producers said that my voice and his are so similar.
They are.
We did a radio show about 2 years after this, just a comedy radio show in the LA area, and the writers wrote a takeoff on 12 Angry Men. And you remember John Feldler was in that film.
Yeah.
Guess who played that role in the sketch?
You did.
Me. Yeah. When I met John Feldler, I said, we've got to be related somehow. And he couldn't hear. He couldn't hear that he and I sounded alike, but everybody else could, and I could hear it. He goes, I'm sorry. He says, you're a nice enough fella, but I don't hear it. I don't hear it.
Oh, that's funny. Well, you never really hear your own voice, do you? I mean, remember the first time you heard your recorded voice? You went, oh, God, I sound like that?
It hasn't changed, Douglas. It hasn't changed since I've been 14. So,
what was the one? Fergus Fingelhoff was the character. He played a frog on Bewitched.
On Bewitched. Yeah. He was in more than one episode, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in a couple of them. He also played the guy that ran the computer dating shop when Serena
and, I forgot that. The show started to repeat itself after 5. Even in the 5th season, it repeated itself so much. You don't want to get me started on that. That last season was just awful, and they were repeating scripts word for word in that last season that they had done in season 2. In fact, you probably know the last episode of the series was a reworking of the truth thing they did in the 2nd season.
Well, we said that before, was that, we felt like, well, maybe they should have just ended when Dick York left. Yeah. Because, in fact, they did. I mean, they repeated several episodes where, there was one where Endora changes Darren into a little kid. And they did that with Dick Sargent.
He was too old to play that part again, so they got a different kid.
Right, but they did that with Dick Sargent and with Dick York, and they also stole scripts from I Love Lucy.
Yep. I put Bill Asher on the spot for that, and his answer was, "Well, if you're going to steal from the best."
Well, okay, I'll give him that. Yeah.
That whole thing where she hires a maid, where Samantha hires a maid, is word for word Lucy and Verna Felton.
Yeah. And the other one where Darren had a houndstooth sport jacket that she threw away or gave to charity. Same thing. Ricky had the same.
Same thing as changing the boy's wardrobe. Right. And then there was another one that was almost identical. I'm trying to think. There was another one that was just like, well, first of all, hiring a maid. Well, of course, Esmeralda was a poor replacement for Marion Lorne.
Yeah, real poor. Yeah.
Not that there was anything wrong with Alice Ghostly, but again, they're trying to keep that loony, Mary Poppins-esque witch character alive, and they did it with Alice Ghostly, and I believe Alice Ghostly did one of the black and white shows too, didn't she? It's all blending together.
That
now.
I'm not sure, but they couldn't replace Aunt Clara. There was just no way.
No, they made her Esmeralda instead, and brought in a different character. Oh, I know what it was. There's an episode where Uncle Arthur and Endora lose their powers and have to go to work, and it was a direct ripoff of the Chocolate Factory show. Do you remember that one?
They work at a pizza parlor or a hot dog stand or something.
But it was the same thing.
But it was the same thing, yeah.
It was the same thing. I can hear Bill Asher. Well, it worked in 1952. It'll work in 1969. I can hear him.
Well, and the other.
And by that point, shows are in rerun, so everybody knew it.
Yeah, so. and then they took Sam and Darren Dick Sargent to Europe on the tour, and I thought, Lucy did that whole thing too.
Yeah. But zapping the Leaning Tower of Pisa straight. Come on. And nobody's going to notice it, and they have to fix it before anybody notices it.
I do have to say the one episode with Dick Sargent that I really liked was the one, it was like 2 or 3 parts where they went to Salem.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that I liked it is because I grew up in Boston, and there were very few major TV shows in Boston at that time. So we knew that they were coming. It was like in the big news. It was on the local news every day. They'd show Liz walking around in Gloucester. They filmed a lot in Gloucester and in Salem and around the House of Seven Gables. And so it was a big news item for local Bostonians that Bewitched had come. So I did appreciate those episodes.
Yeah, well, you've got a memory from your childhood that stayed with you, and I've got several of those. I used to like My Little Margie and I Married Joan when I was a kid, and to look at them now, they're horrible. They're dreadful. It's like, I cringe when I see some of this stuff. You have a totally different perspective. It's kind of like there were 1 or 2 I Love Lucys that I never saw as a kid, and that popped up. The first time they went into syndicated reruns in the late 60s after CBS had canceled them from the morning and released them to stations. And I didn't think one of them was Lucy Cries Wolf. Do you know that one where she's wondering whether Ricky would rush home from the club if a prowler had broken in and tied her up?
I vaguely remember
I never saw that one until it was rerun, and I was about 13 when I saw that for the first time. And I didn't think it was that great. Maybe it isn't one of the better shows. I think a lot of this, we're conditioned as kids to really love this stuff, and it kind of gets into our psyche, and we just have a massive appreciation for them, and they stick with us. But then we see something that was produced at the same time, featuring the same cast and the same writers, and it doesn't have the feel that it had when we were kids. It happened with a couple of Flintstones episodes. Back in those days, I saw those things Friday nights, first run when I was a kid. I didn't see every one of them, but I saw most of them. And then when the local channel in L.A. took them as reruns and ran them every night at 7 o'clock, starting in the mid-'60s, there were 3 or 4 that I hadn't seen before. And I said, well, God, that wasn't a very good one. But maybe it would have been a good one had I had seen it when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Your mind develops a little bit more. You become a little bit more a person of the world, and you tend to start to separate the crappy stuff from the good stuff. And there's a lot of those 1-hour Lucy shows that are just go on forever. The one with Ida Lupino and Howard Duff when they're in the boat, that whole second half of the show just goes on and on and on forever. Yet as a kid, I thought it was great. The 1-hour shows were the first ones I saw before I saw I Love Lucy, because CBS used to run them at night in the summer when Danny Kaye was off or Jackie Gleason. And so those are the ones that I saw first, because I was in school when I Love Lucy was on in the mornings back then. And I love them. And seeing them now, I think a lot of them are just way, way padded.
Yeah,
the Bob Cummings one is horrible.
Oh, the Japan, when they were in Japan?
Yeah. Oh, and part of the problem is they stopped using a live audience because of Desi running the studio, and just because they had to film those things around with everything else that was going on, and their marriage was breaking up. You can see how they aged. That was the one thing. I don't know if you notice this too, but if you watch I Love Lucy in reruns and you watched it every night like I did as a kid, they'd have the last show in Connecticut, which is the one where they dedicate the statue. And if that happened to land in the middle of a week, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and then the next day was Lucy thinks Ricky is going to murder her, it's like an unbelievable transformation to see both of them so much older in only 6 years, the way they look in the Connecticut shows, and then boom, you're back to 1951 when it all started, and they look like a couple of kids. It's like a shock, if there's a weekend in between, you're prepared, but if it's the very next night, it's like, oh my God, look at how much they did change over those 6 years. It's pretty remarkable. And then you add the 3 years for the hour shows at the end, that show with Ernie Kovacs, which was done in the early part of 1960. They look 10 years older than they are in that,
Yeah, they did age.
Very stressful. Very, very stressful for the two of them.
And Ernie, speaking of Ernie Kovacs, he died like a few months after that show, didn't he?
It was a couple of years.
Oh, it was a couple of years?
Either late 61 or early 62. But yeah, he was around for a little bit after that, but certainly not for any long period of time. That car accident took him.
Well, and that was the big controversy over the Corvair, and then Ralph Nader, unsafe at any speed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, the Corvair had the engine in the back, didn't it? Like a Volkswagen.
Yeah, and it didn't handle for shit when it rained. And that was the problem.
Obviously, because he didn't survive that.
He fishtailed right into a telephone pole.
Yeah, he wrapped himself around that pretty good. And then I'll never forget, as a kid, it scared the hell out of me. The Herald Examiner, I think, was the afternoon paper in L.A., and it had a picture. They printed his picture of him hanging out the car door with his hand and the cigar like 2 inches away from his hand. So he's smoking his. But can you imagine the bad taste of that, showing him like sprawled out, hanging out of the car from being wrapped around the telephone pole or whatever it was he ran over. But I saw that picture as a kid, and it scared the hell out of me. So.
Yeah, pretty gruesome. Well, wasn't there the picture, and I think it was debunked later, but there was a picture that came out of Jane Mansfield's decapitated head on the trunk of the car.
I'd heard about that, but I didn't see it. And I don't think anybody would have really printed that in any kind of, L.A. Times or major publication, Las Vegas Sun or whatever. I heard about that, but I never saw that. I never saw that.
Yeah, I don't know if I think the picture had been debunked, like it was a fake, but...
Yeah. And some people said the Ernie Kovacs picture was a fake too, but no, I think it was just pulled right away because somebody realized it was in bad taste. We kind of got off away from Bewitched. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about there?
No, I don't think so. I think.
Okay, I know that we had talked off air about the Dick Sargent and Dick York, and that I was really upset with the way Dick Sargent portrayed Darren when he came in there. But later on, as an adult, I realized he could not do an impression of Dick York. He had to make it himself, and even though they were two distinct, different Darrens, and I didn't like the second Darren, had the second Darren been the original Darren, there wouldn't have been anything to compare it to, because that Dick Sargent was considered for that role before Dick York was.
Yeah, you told me that, which I didn't know.
And what happened was they shot the pilot in 1963, and they shot it during the week that Kennedy was assassinated, and Dick York had signed to do Broadside with Universal, another ABC sitcom, so he couldn't do that. They had him signed, and by the time they were ready to roll, he had committed to that other sitcom. And that other sitcom was canceled, but they had already shot the pilot with Dick York, and it was already sold at that point.
Well, I think we both agree, though, that they probably should have ended at the end of season 5.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because she had another baby in real life, and they wrote it into the show. And those last 3 years were just terrible, especially that last year. Ugh. And ABC knew it. That's when they put it on Saturday nights against All in the Family to kill it off.
That would do it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. They moved it mid-season to Wednesday nights, but it was already a done deal by that. And she didn't want to do that 8th year. They backed up the Brinks truck for both of them to get one more year out of it. And there are bewitched historians out there that say in protest, that's why Elizabeth wore her hair differently that last year. But you know what? I liked the way she wore her hair that last year.
Well, she could do no wrong for me.
No.
I definitely had a major crush on her when I was a kid.
Who didn't? Bill Mumy was on the show, and we talked about the 2 episodes he did. The first season, he played a kid at an orphanage that didn't believe in Santa Claus. And the second season, he played Darren as a kid. And boy, he got Dick York's mannerisms and everything down brilliantly. He was such a good little actor when he was a kid. But he told me, he said from the moment he was on that set at 8 years old or whatever it was for that first show, no, he was older than that. He was born in 1953, so he was 11 for the first show and 12 for the second. He had an enormous crush on Elizabeth Montgomery from the day he walked on that set the first time. And when they negotiated for him to play that part in the second season, that was right before, like literally weeks before Lost in Space started production. He was so happy that he could go back and do Bewitched one more time before he was committed to doing Lost in Space, just so he could be around Elizabeth Montgomery for another week. So we're not alone, my friend. We're not alone.
Well, Stu, I think on that we're going to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming back. This was a lot of fun.
You bet. Anytime you want me, we can talk classic TV. You just let me know.
All right. Give out your website again, please.
It's very easy. It's StuSshow.com. STUSSHOW.com.
All right, great. Well, thanks again. Always a pleasure.
Same here. Thanks, Douglas.